So now we'll cut a second strip. So we have two 2-inch wide strips. Our fabric was ready to go. And our next step will be joining these two. Now is where we remove the selvage. Just as you left the selvage on during the skirt construction, we're gonna take our rotary cutter and away from our bodies, we're gonna cut the selvage off. You can also use the ruler as your guide, but for something a cut this short, I wasn't as concerned about it. So now we have one strip of perfectly nice pink fabric that's quickly going to become our skirt hem. We'll do the same thing with the other one. Remove the selvage away from ourselves. So close your rotary cutter up, and now I've got two to go. To start, we're going to make our binding tape so that it's essentially longer than we need it, because these two width of the fabric strips will be more than we need, but we can set it aside for another project. One of my favorite things is having just extra binding tape pieces left over for doing like a variegated quilt binding, or even pressing back out to become 2-inch strips again for quilting or patchwork. What I'll do now is holding these two together. You can pin them if you like, but it's not 100% necessary. Holding these two together, I'll just sit down at my machine. It's on a straight stitch with a standard stitch length. I'll simply, using about a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is very narrow if you're used to garment sewing it, which is typically a 5/8. This is just, the only point is that you don't want to add a lot of bulk here, so you're going to do a fairly narrow 1/4 inch is my preferred to join this for binding tape. You'll just stitch forward, reverse, and then continue stitching forward. And this is right sides together. So when you have your strip joined with its second one, this raw edge will be to the wrong side of the fabric. And from the correct side, front of the fabric, it will just simply look like a neat join without any raw edges or folds showing. Now I'll just press this fabric out using a little best press, which gives it a nice, crisp, and very easy to use texture. Quilting cotton is wonderful, but it can have a little bit of, it just depending on the manufacturer, they're also different, but basically you're gonna have a crisp, easy to use fabric. Not too soft and pliable, and not too stiff and hard to use. So, without my iron cord in my way, I'm gonna just press this perfectly flat. Moving forward, this is kind of an unusual ironing setup. Normally I can, when I'm just in my own sewing room, I'll have a strip lying the length of a larger ironing board and just spray it all at once. When you get to your join, hold it wrong side up so the fold shows, and press the folds open like this. If you have a slight difference in width, just trim it out here so it's more of a join, neat and clean join. And then you'll press the rest of it just as normal, no other difference. But make sure you press the join open and flat. Yeah.
I was overzealous and I cleaned up my edge of my pink before I did the 2-inch, so now the second piece is, can I make it 1.5 inches? Would that make a difference?
Let's just get you some more fabric. You can make a 1.5, but we have it would mean a different size binding tape maker.
Okay.
And we will be using that for a different project, but if we can just grab a little more pink fabric, we'll be good to go.
Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes it's worth changing it around, and the 1.5 inches is totally a usable binding tape size. But for this one, it's kind of nice with the zigzag to get a little more chance to do a slightly wider one. But yeah, save that for patchwork. So for this one, I'm just gonna press out my end one more time. And now we're ready to make our binding tape. Take one end of this long piece of fabric and snip it at an angle. So now that you have this one, it will be much easier to feed it through this little binding tape maker. I like to use my seam ripper to guide the binding tape fabric through the maker. And this part is essential to have your iron close and handy. So you'll get into a little rhythm with it where it'll kind of flow as you do it. But for the first time you're doing it, I'll go a little slow when I'm showing you the beginning so it's easy to follow along. So as you can see, there's a small opening in the top of this binding tape maker. I'm going to use my seam ripper to guide my fabric through, and the pattern right side should be facing upward. And we're going to just tug it through. I'll flip this over in a second when it gets oriented so you can see what it actually looks like. With this part of the binding tape maker has the beginning of what's going to be your long strand of binding tape. It's evenly feeding through this very ingenious little machine where fabric has a chance to be folded and pressed with your iron in a very neat, very organized way. So the raw edges will be in the middle. And once we're able to move forward with it, you'll see just after the first inch or two what it looks like. So I'm gonna use my iron with my right hand, and I'm going to, let's arrange this so it doesn't have a lot of weight to it. How about right here? So I'm just gonna start by pressing this beginning part down. It has a good start. This is just gonna be the beginning, but just so it doesn't curl back up or get a little tangly in advance. Now I'm gonna flip my binding tape maker over. Clover makes a wonderful binding tape maker. There are plenty of other brands, but I always use theirs at home. And now, I'm just gonna angle this a bit so I have a little bit more diagonal room. So now, using my iron in my right hand, I'm gonna gently press this flat. As you can see, the folded fabric is underneath right now. I'm just gonna start this way, and I'm gonna pull this binding tape maker away from my iron, following it neatly with the iron. And every few inches, I'll just back up and give it a nice smooth reinforcement. Turning it over, you can see, that it's got a really neat, clean inner fold. When we eventually fold it and put it around our skirt, it's gonna hide the raw edge completely.